I'm hoping this is going to be, my PowerPoint's going to match. I made updates right to the last minute, Brian, so I hope it's, we've been talking about finding your niche. Yes, I think this is, I deleted some of the slides that we'd already talked about and just pick up right where we left off. Last week, we've been studying personalities and understanding our own personality, understanding other folks' personalities, and using that to promote unity, to maintain unity, and also to increase our work, our productivity, and the work that we're able to accomplish in the Lord's kingdom. We're in this section, as I mentioned, I think I mentioned this last week, maybe even the week before. This is the section that to me is kind of almost like the hub of the study. It's finding your place, finding my place within the body of Christ, even right here within the local congregation, finding our niche. Also, the section that we'll get into tonight, we won't finish it, but we'll get into talking about dealing with difficult people. That's sometimes is something that we're going to have to face, whether it be whether it be in the church or anywhere else. But when you come to the body of Christ, the church, you don't just immediately, well, there are no difficult people. If you've been around much at all, you know that's not the case. Sometimes, it's like the old saying, we have found the enemy and the enemy is us. Sometimes we find that, I'm the difficult person. I heard of a fellow that was talking to a buddy one time, and he says, I went to this church, and it was two preachers talking. I went to this church, and then the people were just so hard to get along with, and so I finally just had enough of that. I left, and I went to another church and said, man, they were just awful too. And so I left there, and I went to another church, and I said, I'm thinking about leaving here. These people are hard to get along with. And finally, he had a friend who was really a true friend, and he said, have you ever considered maybe the problem is you? Maybe you're the reason you're not getting along with people. And so, again, that's part of the study, is understanding our own personality and realizing that sometimes I might be the reason that I'm having trouble getting along with somebody. But let's finish the section we were talking about last week before we move into all that. I moved through this very quickly last week because we were just completely out of time. I mentioned the sanguines. It'd be great once a year to brainstorm with them for ideas, because the sanguines are going to come up with some really amazing ideas. I mean, they have this zest, this enthusiasm, and if you could just sit down with them, it might be as an eldership, it might be as a, head over a Bible school program, maybe just sit down with the sanguines ever so often and say, hey, give us some ideas. Give me your best ideas. And with the understanding that we can't use everything. It's just impossible to use everything. And in fact, some of them are not going to be very feasible. Some of them, it's just not going to work right now. But get those ideas. And I promise you, some great ideas would come in. They're going to excel at things like visitation, edifying others, helping with the youth, fellowship, anything that involves a lot of people getting together. That's going to be kind of a strength for a sanguine. This is where I had to really rush through, though. I wanted to look. He mentions in each one of these some great areas of service. There are others that we could mention. In fact, if you think of some others, just throw them out there right now, or be thinking about this between now and our next class. But some great areas of service for the sanguine. Any out front, so to speak, area is going to work for a sanguine. Getting up in front of the audience, leading prayers. There are folks, even right here within this congregation, that you have just told me since we started this study, I'm more of a phlegmatic, or I'm more of a melancholy. Even some of the men say, you know what, it's hard for me even to get up in front of the congregation and lead a prayer. And that's just some folks' personality. Some folks say, I'll do it because I want to serve. I want to help the church in whatever way I can, but it's not my thing. It's not my favorite thing to do. Whereas a sanguine may say, yeah, I'll lead a prayer anytime. Call on me anytime. You can call me, you can come to a sanguine. It's time for services to start, and you say, well, our guy that's supposed to lead prayer, he's not here. Do you mind just grabbing open in prayer real quick? Sure. It's just different personalities. Maybe teaching, and again, especially children or teens, speaking, announcements. A sanguine's going to do well with something like announcements. Greeters. Oh, what a great work for a sanguine to be a greeter. When visitors come in, they're going to have a friendly smile, someone to say hello. Talk about getting, round pegs in the round holes and square pegs in the square holes. Sometimes it's difficult. You don't want to put, if you got two families back there being greeters, you don't want to have two phlegmatics or two melancholies. I mean, you're going to have visitors come in, it's going to be kind of like, and you know, the visitors are kind of like, what's going on, you know, and hello, hey, how are you? You know, and it's just going to be, that's going to be difficult. It's going to be different. It's not going to be comfortable for that personality type. Now, that's not to say they can't do that. In fact, you know, again, I know a lot of folks that say that's not my personality, but I've tried to work on that, and I make it a point. If I see somebody walk in and I'm that greeter, I'm going to say hello. And it may not come naturally or as naturally, but they say I'm going to do that. And that's what they do. I know preachers who are not the most extroverted personality type, but they say, you know what, I do this work, I love this work, I want to be a located preacher, and I want to do that full time, and so I'm going to work diligently to approach people and to talk to people and so on. But especially if you paired if you had a phlegmatic type or a melancholy type, and you pair them with one of the more extroverted types, you know, obviously that's going to be better in like a greeting situation. But anyway, hosting activities, advertising. Boy, if sanguines are going to do great with advertising. They can promote and push something like nobody else. And decorating, things like that. Those are just a few areas of service. Then we mentioned the melancholies. You know, if you go from there, you have all these ideas. Take it to the melancholies. What they'll do is they'll cull it. They'll cull the ideas that won't work, that aren't feasible, and determine what can be used, what can't be used. They can then organize them. Here's something that we can do in the immediate future. Here's something that's going to be on those long range, and here's something maybe that even is in that 50 to 100-year plan. And we talked about that. It's not very often you see brethren who plan that far in advance, but we need to, don't we? And we understand there's not going to be, you know, as concrete a plan as for this year or next year, but some goals for on down the road. And of course, we mentioned the melancholies. They might even want to use those graphs and those charts that they love so much. But you can take these ideas to them, and they could even, you know, they might even make a chart of here's what can be done in the immediate future, here's what's in the not too distant future, and here's what's on down the road. But you get the idea. They kind of cull things out and organize things, all these ideas that you got from the sanguines. Some great areas of service for like a melancholy. Teaching. They do really well with adult classes because they've got that intellect, that thought process. Organizing activities. Well, if you want to have, that might be something as small as a Brothers Keepers meeting. Might be you want to put together some kind of an area-wide meeting or something like that. It might be an area-wide youth event or whatever, but something that requires more organization. Boy, melancholy is going to excel at that. And I know sometimes even as those folks who are sanguine, who maybe have melancholy wives, and you can kind of rely on your wife to help organize and plan things that maybe you don't do so well with, right? That's working together. Special days. Maybe we're going to have a friends and family day or getting ready for the gospel meeting. Just not that long ago, just this past weekend, we had a situation where there was a funeral. Well, you know, getting everything organized for that. Man, melancholies, they just excel at that, even on short notice many times. Mission works, being a treasurer, anything clerical. Their attention to detail is just works so well, like in clerical type work. Repairs, they're going to make sure it's done right. That's the melancholy in them. They're going to make sure they fix something. They're not going to halfway do it. They're going to make sure it's done right. Bulletin boards, there's that artsy, decorative type mentality coming out. Painting murals, things like that, maintaining a church library, and so on. All of these fall into areas of that would be just kind of natural areas of service for a melancholy type personality. And then, of course, we mentioned once you've organized your ideas, once you've kind of removed the ones that, that's probably not going to work too well, at least not right now, you know, then you can go to the cholerics and let them sort of take the bull by the horns. We're ready for you to start implementing these things. Can you handle this project right here? We need to get somebody on this right away, and we need a leader. Well, you want to put a choleric on that. Don't go to a phlegmatic type personality and say, well, here we got this project. The sanguines had this great idea. The melancholies have organized and said this is something that really needs to be implemented right away, so could you handle that? Well, the phlegmatic might be so non-confrontational that he's not going to tell you no, but he's probably not going to do, he's almost for sure not going to do nearly as well as if you handed that to like a choleric. Let them take the lead. What they'll do is they'll go out and they'll recruit the help they need, They'll probably utilize someone like a sanguine to advertise it, to promote it, get folks fired up about it. But a choleric, you can put them in several areas of service. And again, as I've said before with other things, this is not to say these are the only areas where these folks can serve. It's just they'll naturally gravitate toward these things. In fact, when folks place membership or they obey the gospel, the elders hand them a sheet. They want information. When is your birthday? When did you obey the gospel? Things like that. Just some of that's information. But there's also a section on there, choose the areas where you want to serve. And you can go down through those if you had all those in front of you, and you could just about tell what type personality some folks are by looking at that. Some of it's a little generic, but you could at least say extrovert or introvert. Because the extroverts are checking, I'll lead prayer, I'll teach a class, I'll do, anything involved in, they don't mind being up in front of people. I'll do announcements, I'll be a greeter. The introverts are saying, well, I'll prepare communion. I'll organize an event and let somebody else kind of take the lead on it, but I'll organize, that kind of thing. And you can just see the difference. But areas of service a choleric might gravitate toward will be leading prayer, teaching. Some of these are very similar to the sanguine, as you can see. Speaking, directing programs, they're going to do really well with that. Supervising, they'll always do well with anything that involves leadership. Training teachers, there's that leadership again. Leading a mission trip, and so on. So again, you see I thought I had that on the screen. You'll see the leadership coming out over and over again with the choleric. They're natural leaders. They gravitate toward anything that involves leadership. And then finally, you get all these ideas, you've got them organized, you've called out the ones that you can't use, or at least not in the immediate future. You've kind of handed that over to the cholerics to implement and to lead it and bring everything to fruition. And then you get your phlegmatics involved, because as we said last week, kind of closing out quickly, what is a benevolence program if you don't have love? Well, sir, I understand you're in need, but we have a set amount of help that we're going to do here, and sometimes can benevolence programs get very cold and lifeless and just completely lacking in compassion? I've seen that happen. I've been with congregations where that happened, where it's, you fill out this form, you will get 2 canned items, you will get 1 box of this, you will get 1 bag of rice, you will get 1 package of noodles, and it's just kind of like, whoa. It feels more like a food bank than a church. And I understand there's got to be you got to have some rules, or, somebody come in, you can't just say, hey, walk into this room and just take whatever you'd like. Now, that's the other extreme, right? But you got to have some compassion. And so the phlegmatic can help insert the compassion, the love. Jesus talks about, I was in prison and you visited me or didn't visit me. I was naked and you clothed me or not. Thirsty and you gave me drink or not. Hungry and you gave me food or not. So all those different things. What is a benevolence program without love? What is evangelism if you don't do it in love? Speaking the truth in love, Ephesians 4:15. If we're not careful, that can become such a mission-oriented, task or goal-oriented thing that we forget about the whole point of it. It's not about achieving success. We want success because every soul represents, every person represents a soul that's going to be in heaven or hell eternally. But it doesn't just become a task to succeed or fail. And sometimes we can even feel like we've failed, and the cholerics may struggle with that. If there are not a lot of people obeying the gospel, we kind of feel like we've failed, forgetting that failure is not doing evangelism. Failure is not when people don't obey the gospel or when people fall away. Failure is when we don't try. He says, you go plant the seed. You water the seed. God gives the increase. The phlegmatics will also help all the other temperaments involved to work together, to unite, to have peace among themselves as they carry out these works. A lot of times you'll see phlegmatics gravitate toward things like preparing the Lord's Supper, serving the Lord's Supper. A lot of times I've heard more introverted phlegmatic types, maybe the melancholies will fall into this as well. They'll say, look, I don't mind. I'll get up in front of the congregation and do the Lord's Supper because I don't have to say anything. In fact, they'll say, keep me on that outer edge so I don't have to be one of the ones leading the prayer. The 2 guys in the middle tend to do the prayers. They'll say, keep me on that outer edge. Sometimes folks will say that, and that's okay. Again, sometimes some folks are more comfortable there, but they say, hey, look, if you need me, I want to serve and I want to help, and so I'll do my best. And but that's kind of, again, what they'll gravitate toward. Serving the Lord's Supper to the shut-ins, especially. That's something that phlegmatics would excel at and gravitate toward. Writing letters of encouragement, helping with the nursery, helping prepare food for the sick, on and on. You see the types of areas of service. And so, the point of all this is, where do you belong? Find your place, find your niche, find where you fit in the body. Maybe you've got ideas. Give those ideas to the elders, to the leadership. I understand not every idea can be used, and I think most people understand that. But share those ideas. Maybe you've got exceptional organizational skill. Go to the elders and say, look, if there's something I can help in organizing, and I want to use my talents in that area. Maybe you're a choleric type personality. Let the leaders know if there's a program that needs leadership, I'm willing to step up. I'll help with that. And then, of course, all of us really need to work on adding love and compassion to everything that we do in the kingdom of Christ. So find your place, find that place, fit in it, and serve in it. And work as time goes on as well, getting out of that comfort zone. We will never entirely change our personality, but I have seen it. We've talked about it before. I've seen it a lot in the congregation here since I've come here. People that were very introverted, and they said, you know what? Especially from our first Sunday of the month, or first Sunday of the year, elders' budget and goals presentation. One brother, it's been 2 or 3 years ago, sat down and told me, he said, I'm going to get up at some point this year, and I'm going to extend the invitation on a Wednesday night. And I said, really? He said, I may faint, I may fall out, I may throw up all over that stage, but I'm going to do it. And I said, hey, man, that's awesome. And we kind of started talking some more, and he said, the elders challenged us to begin this year to get out of our comfort zone a little bit, find ways to help, to get involved, and to challenge ourselves. And he said, for me, this is a challenge, but I'm going to do it. He mentioned his wife had kind of taken that challenge, and he said, I've seen her. She was going to do something, I think, with the ladies' Devo or something, and he said, I'm going to, hey, if she can do it, I can do it. And I'm going to get out of my comfort zone. And so that's great. Your temperament is going to make you gravitate towards certain things, and that's okay. But don't be afraid to challenge yourself either. And I think that helps a lot. Let's move into the next section here. This is the last section of our study. I had hoped that we would finish it today, but there's actually a lot in this. There's no way we will finish this tonight. But a modern-day miracle, using that term accommodatively, of course, getting along with difficult Christians. Again, just because we are members of the body of Christ doesn't mean that people cease being difficult. Sometimes there are difficult people. Key verse here is Romans 12:18. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. That's understanding that sometimes you can't live peaceably with some people. You don't have to live at odds with them, constantly fighting and bickering. But it is just to point out that sometimes you can't live peaceably with folks. And so Paul says, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all people. Let's kind of introduce this, talking about difficult people. One definition of difficult is hard to understand, right? Is it not a fact that a lot of times, quote, difficult people are people that we just don't understand very well? Have you ever thought of someone as difficult, and maybe you got to know them a little bit better, and lo and behold, they actually became a pretty good friend? I have. I remember a few years ago, I was being attacked mercilessly by some brethren, simply because I was working with GBN, and they had a beef with GBN over something that was really just ridiculous and wrong, and they didn't bother to get the facts straight, and they kind of had their minds made up and didn't want to be bothered with the facts. But they were they were going after me. And I remember one day making a comment to somebody. I was just exasperated, and I said, do you ever feel like if people ever got to know you that maybe they might just like you? And you couldn't talk to these people. It was constantly in an attack mode. But sometimes we just don't understand people. Maybe we don't understand where they're coming from. Maybe we don't understand their temperament. And sometimes that's where the difficulty is. People are sometimes difficult because they're not like me. People might be difficult to you because they're not like you. Everybody has their own unique strengths and weaknesses. What if the difficult people are elders? What if they're deacons? What if they're Bible class teachers? What happens all too often? Well, what happens all too often? Gee, people just out the door. And again, sometimes they're out the door, they go to another congregation, and they find that there are difficult people there as well. And, you know, I mentioned earlier, sometimes the difficult person is self. But it may be that there really are difficult people there, because guess what? There are difficult people everywhere. And so if my first instinct is just to bolt, what good is that doing? Am I ever going to be very productive in the kingdom? At some point, we need to learn to deal with conflict. We need to learn to get along with, yes, even the difficult people. I know sometimes it reaches a point where the best thing is, and that's why Paul says, as much as lieth in you. It may come to a point where you say, you know what? The best thing for me is to move on. And I've been there as a preacher. I didn't make a big deal. I didn't cause a big stink. I just quietly turned in a resignation, and I said, the best thing right now, brethren, is for me to move on. I'm not going to hinder this work. I'm not going to try to hurt the body of Christ. But it's clear that the leadership and I, we cannot work together. We're kind of at an impasse. And sometimes that happens. But wouldn't you agree that probably more often than not, that's not the case? I love what Tracy says in the book. He says, you know, if by studying these things, even one split in the church could be stopped, or one person falling away from the Lord because they get discouraged trying to deal with difficult people, if one person could be helped to stay faithful, and then all the time and effort in writing the book and publishing the book was worth it. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Now, a couple things we want to consider. Number one, some people are just mentally incapable of getting along with others. I'm not saying that in an ugly way. I'm saying that's just sometimes a fact. Sometimes there is some kind of a disorder. It could be mental, it could be psychosomatic, whatever, that causes them difficulty, sometimes impossibility in having healthy social relationships. There are some people that are like that. There's more going on there. There may need to be professional help or something like that. Understand, that's the kind of person there will be difficulties with nonstop because there's a problem there. And let's face the fact that some people are just unwilling to get along with others. Have you ever known someone that relished conflict? And I'm not talking, now the choleric temperament sometimes almost relishes conflict because it's the idea of overcoming an obstacle. But many times a choleric, especially in the context of the church, they're not relishing conflict for the sake of conflict. They're relishing it because they're trying to get it out of the way, handle it on the way to getting to that goal and succeeding and leading. Some folks just like conflict. They don't want to get along with other people. And, I've known folks like that. You've probably known folks like that. These are people that don't care about God's will. They want to do what they want. And sometimes, just to be completely honest, they're like spoiled brats. They want their way. And if they don't get their way, then look out. You're going to have to face the dragon's breath. We don't want to be people like that, but understand those are not what we're talking about in this particular study. If somebody has some kind of a mental disorder going on or something there that is at least inhibiting getting along with others, that's a different story, and that's probably another whole other lesson or another study. If someone doesn't care about God's will, but I'm saying most of the time in the church when we deal with difficult people, these are people who I want to do God's will, they want to do God's will. We just don't understand each other. Sometimes we're talking past each other. Sometimes we just don't understand one another. And this is the section of the book that sometimes I was reading it and I'm just going, okay, now I get it. And you'll probably think of situations, people, as we go through this, and you'll think, okay, that's why I've butted heads with that person in the past. And hopefully by understanding them a little bit better, maybe we can get along with one another a little bit better in the body of Christ. Most often, with a little bit of effort, we can get along with difficult people. Sometimes a lot of effort, but we can most of the time. Who are these difficult people? What we're going to do tonight, in the time we have left, is look at probably the difficulties you'll see with each personality type, some of the more prominent ones, certainly not exhaustive. And then we'll talk about, okay, if you're dealing with a difficult sanguine, here's some advice. If you're dealing with a difficult phlegmatic, here's some advice. Difficult melancholies and so on. But now let's talk about each personality type. What makes sanguines difficult? Well, nothing, right? They're the life of the party. Well, it depends on what personality is dealing with a sanguine, right? Sometimes sanguines can be difficult. One of the main reasons that people will say that have difficulty with sanguines is they'll say they act like a child. Some folks describing this temperament call them older children, right? And you know, if you have a lot of sanguine in you, or if you've dealt with a sanguine, maybe you live with a sanguine, you can probably appreciate this, right? What do children do with their toys? Unless you have a very melancholy child, I guess. But they tend to do what with their toys? They leave them wherever they're done with them, right? They're all over the place. I mean, their toys are all over the house. You know, put this in an adult context, the sanguine may be the person that borrows something and then they forget about it, and you're going, man, you know, Chad just stole my book. Chad just stole this. He stole that. I'm going to get your books back to you, Bob. Don't worry. I've got them. I know where they are. And don't get too carried away with that. But, you know, that you may say, he just stole my stuff. He's not turning it back in. And sometimes the resource room, there's material that's just disappeared, and you find it, and it was from like 2 years ago VBS left down in the classroom. Why? Well, because the sanguine was done with it, and when he was done with it, he or she just puts it down. Sometimes it happens, right? Just like the children who go all over the house, and they're playing with something, then they're done with it, and they leave it. And then you step on it, and it hurts, and you're angry. But, you know, that's the sanguine personality. And here's the deal. Other personalities will sometimes see that, and they'll say, that guy or that lady is so rude, so inconsiderate. And let me say this. In one sense, it is. And that's something that, you know, if I'm a sanguine, I want to try to work on that, because I don't want to be inconsiderate and rude. But what we need to realize, if you're another personality, if I'm on the other side of that, is this is not somebody who just doesn't care. Man, he left that stuff down there because he just doesn't care about the material that we have in our resource room. He borrowed that projector. He didn't turn it back in. He just doesn't care. That's not necessarily the case. There does need to be some working on considering others, and considering that, you know, sometimes you're borrowing something, maybe it's a resource room or from a friend that costs a lot of money, making sure I take real good care of it. But it's not just because the person says, you know, I don't care. I don't care about this piece of equipment. I'm going to treat it however I want to. It's probably not that. It's just a personality, a temperament. And granted, that's something that needs to be worked on, but just understand it's not somebody who's just completely inconsiderate. So sometimes they just strow stuff everywhere, right? They also have this in common with, you know, as far as acting like little children, they look for the shiny and the new, right? In everything. Everything needs to be shiny and new. If you want the sanguine on board, present it as something new. We're gonna try something new. I mean, it's like a magic word for a sanguine. You know, they're just like, oh, something new. We're gonna mix things up a little bit. Oh, you got their attention now. And so they love something shiny and new. And in fact, there's something about sanguines many times, especially a real strong sanguine. If something is not fun, and I'm using that kind of accommodatively, fun as they view it. If something is not fun to them, they feel almost like this inner longing, this compulsion to revive it, to make it fun. This is the guy who will laugh at a funeral. Why? It's not because he's inconsiderate. It's because funerals aren't typically fun, right? And so he kind of just feels like this, I need to, and maybe even, you know, he's visiting in the hospital and he makes a joke, and man, especially if you got a melancholy sitting over there, and he's just like jaw dropped, like, what did you just say? You just can't believe it. And the sanguine is just trying to make a not so fun situation a little bit more fun. But not everybody has that same thought process, do they? And so some people, like, the jaw just drops and they think, I'm not believing how rude and inconsiderate this person is. Again, the sanguine's got to learn to think a little bit more before we say things like that. Got to be careful about that. But they feel compelled to revive it. And so if you're in an important meeting, you think that's annoying? The guy that won't quit cracking jokes because the meeting is boring, and I'm trying to revive it. I'm trying to make it fun. It gets old quick, doesn't it, sometimes? And especially if you become the target of a joke, then it really gets annoying. And so the more sensitive temperaments are going to find this especially extremely irritating. I mean, he can't take anything seriously. And that may not necessarily be the case. It may just be that he wants to try to, or she wants to try to make a not too fun situation a little bit more fun. Try to lighten the load, so to speak. Brighten the room a little bit. But not everybody looks at it as brightening the room, do they? Some people look at it as out of place, inappropriate, downright rude, inconsiderate, and so on. Another problem with sanguines is that many times they'll talk faster than they think, if they think at all. I knew a young boy years ago that his dad would sometimes say to him, "Chad, do you ever stop and think?" Not Chad, I'm sorry, that was the wrong person. But that's a sanguine quality, isn't it? Sometimes we just act without thinking, right? Very impulsive. And they talk faster than they think in a good situation. Worst case scenario, they talk without thinking at all. And again, they'll make remarks that appear insensitive and sometimes inappropriate, sometimes at an inappropriate time. And especially, this is where a sanguine and a melancholy will really get sideways of one another sometimes, because the melancholy especially will really just find this completely inexcusable, because the melancholy always thinks before speaking. I mean, the mind just doesn't ever shut off for a melancholy. The sanguine more or less has to turn the mind on, right? You got to remind myself, I got to think before I say this. I got to think before I do this. Not the melancholy. They can't shut it off. Sometimes the melancholy is lying awake in the middle of the night because they can't shut the brain off. They just think, constantly thinking. And so for somebody who always thinks before speaking, and then all of a sudden they're around somebody who has trouble thinking before speaking, how do you think that's going to go? You think those two are going to view each other as a difficult person, whether in the body of Christ or in the workplace or wherever? You better believe it. And so sometimes you just got especially the melancholy type, and he's just kind of staring daggers at that sanguine. Here he goes again. And Tracy gives a good illustration. In Matthew 14, Jesus comes walking to them on the water. What does Peter say? Our just strong sanguine in the New Testament. What does he say without even thinking about it? Clearly without thinking about it. If it's you, just bid me come to you, Lord. Well, come on, Peter. You think he thought about that? I know he didn't think about it. Why? Because he did start thinking about it after the fact when he got to going, well, this is a pretty big storm here. I am on the water, I am outside the boat, and I am in the middle of a storm. And now he's sinking. And he cries out, "Save me, Lord." He didn't give that a lot of thought. Do you wonder if the other apostles in the boat kind of rolled their eyes? There goes Peter again. Yeah, go, boy. Get on out. See how that works out for you. Here he goes again, impulse Peter. I just kind of wonder if maybe they thought that. And not only that, because what have we sometimes pointed out about the other apostles? They didn't get out of the boat, did they? And so they might have been a little bit upset too, because, Peter's making us look bad. He gets out of the boat and we don't. And I mean, why should he get any credit? He didn't even give that any thought. Just impulsively, bid me come to you, Lord. Well, that wasn't all bad though, was it? We understand there was something to that. That was just the faith of a child. Lord, I'm coming to you. Just like a fella, I heard of a preacher one time. He was preaching a gospel meeting, and he extended the invitation, and he stood down on the floor, and his family was with him. And he had a 2 or 3 year old child, and that child just got loose from mama, and he ran all the way down the center aisle, right to Daddy. And here's Daddy standing up in front. And, everybody was distracted, and what that fella ended up doing was he stopped the invitation song, and he kind of made a point, the faith of a child. The child just naturally wants to come and see Daddy. He wants to be with his dad. And he went on to make a point that, what about us? Do we want to be with the Father? or willing to step out in faith. And he used that to kind of extend a second invitation. And that had everybody's attention. And he used a very strong object lesson. But, I've often wondered, how did the other apostles feel about that? We know from Mark 9:33 and 34, there was kind of a debate going on amongst them about what? Who's the greatest? And, here's Peter. Clearly, he must think he's somebody. He's just going to walk right out there on the water with Jesus. I don't know if they thought that, but it does make you wonder how they felt about that. Because Peter, he clearly did not give that a lot of thought. And so sometimes sanguines, they can act like children. They can talk faster than they think. A few others, this is from the personality assessment. I just copied these, the negatives. And this is what will sometimes, see if any of these sound like, if you live with a sanguine, if you know a sanguine, if you are a sanguine, maybe you are familiar with some of this. Undisciplined. Sometimes you just think, why can't you just discipline yourself to do this or to do that? Repetitious. Forgetful. They forget things. Because there's a lot going on in that mind, right? Interrupts. Sometimes they just got to tell you something, right? And sometimes you think, hello, I was talking. Unpredictable. You just never know what that fellow's going to do. Haphazard. Angered easily. Don't see that one as much. At least I haven't with sanguines, but sometimes that's the case. Naive. Just look at the world through rose-colored glasses sometimes, right? Wants credit. Well, they love to be praised. You want to make a sanguine happy? Give them some praise. Say, good job with that. They could go off that for days or weeks. Talkative. Disorganized. Maybe some of you here are melancholies living with a sanguine. You know what's up with that, don't you? Inconsistent, messy, show off, loud, scatterbrained, restless. My youngest, I've told you before, is a 1,000% sanguine. And Caleb, actually the other night was at some store in Oxford, and they had all this, I guess it was some stuff from Christmas on clearance. Well, they had these hockey sticks that had been sitting there. Well, and I think he was in Oxford. Kara's not in here right now. I can't ask her, but it was in Oxford. So, hockey sticks in Oxford, Alabama are not going to go anywhere for a while. They've just been sitting there for a long time, and they've marked down to $16. Well, it's a pretty good hockey stick, so he sends me a picture of it. I said, oh, yeah, it's a lefty, and Noah could use a stick, sure. Grab it. Well, the stick is about 18 inches to 2 feet too tall for him. But Noah has a new stick. Noah's going to use that new stick. And I told him, I said, buddy, I don't think that's going to work too well because that's too long. You could use a stick that's a little bit long, but that's ridiculous. You won't be able to play with that. He came over here yesterday because practice is on Tuesday. And I was in the middle of something. I didn't hear probably 10 minutes of the conversation, but he's just on and on and on telling me how he can use this stick because it doesn't matter that it's too long. And not only that, for a player like me, it doesn't matter that it's too long. And I finally got up in the middle of this discourse. I went to the bathroom. He proceeded to follow me to the bathroom, into the bathroom, continues this conversation. I'm like, what is going on? It was nonstop. He did not take a breath for at least 10 minutes. And finally, I'm standing at the sink in there, and he says, so you see, it doesn't matter that this stick is too long. Well, that's all I came to tell you, Dad. And he turned and walked out. I was I'm in shock. What just happened here? And I'm sitting here preparing for this lesson and thinking about that, and I thought, wow. That is an illustration, if ever there was one, of a complete, total sanguine. He just walks right in. He repeated himself 1,000 times during that one little speech. I was trying to say something to him a couple times, interrupted me, because he's got naive because he thinks he can do this. He wants credit because he says, for a player like me, it's okay. For somebody else, it might not work. Talkative, disorganized, inconsistent, messy, show off. Wow. Loud, scatterbrained. These are the sanguines. And, I have a lot of sanguine in me, but it all went to Noah, apparently, because that is, in our family, he is the one I mean, it is unreal. And I just sat there and thought as that conversation ended, and especially the way he just ended with such, resolution. And there you have it, Dad. And off he goes, and he's out the door. And I thought, that is a sanguine if ever there was one. So the sanguines. Well, what makes a choleric difficult? Again, there are other things we could talk about, and we'll look at some of those at the end, but a couple of major ones here. Cholerics will often hurt other people's feelings. If you are a strong choleric, you've probably had people say, man, why do you have to be so mean? Or maybe you're friends with a choleric, or maybe you're married to a choleric, and you feel like, man, they hurt my feelings all the time. The choleric, they don't mean to come across as cold or callous. They just say what they're thinking at the time. Once again, this doesn't mean that's always okay. We all have to learn, just like the sanguine has to learn to start, pause for a moment and think before I say something or do something. So likewise with the choleric. But what I need to understand if I'm dealing with a choleric is that they're not just cold, callous people. It's easy to start thinking that. They're not. Many times they're very deeply concerned. They just kind of say what they're thinking at the time. And they're going to tell you how they feel, even if it's about you. You got some personality types that they go to, and it's not right. In fact, it's wrong. It's sinful. They'll get over here behind your back, and they'll say, I can't stand that Chad. But the choleric, if he doesn't like you, he'll say, look, I think you can, especially if it's dealing with like a phlegmatic type personality. I think you're not involved enough. I think you this. But they're not going to say it behind your back. They're going to say it to you. They'll tell you how they feel, even if it's about you. And what's interesting about this is this is how they want to be treated too. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. They want you. I mean, a choleric will tell you, if you have something wrong, if you have a problem with me, just come and tell me. So you're not going to upset me. Come tell me about it. And it's hard for some personalities to get that. The other personalities, especially introverted personalities, that's tough for them, really tough. But the choleric is saying, what's the big deal? If you got a disagreement, or if I've done something, maybe I've upset you, or maybe you don't like something that I've done, come and tell me. But again, that's very, very different from the melancholy, from the phlegmatic, because they think before they speak. And they get upset and wonder, why doesn't everybody else think before they speak? Here's a good example. He gives a variation of this in the book. Maybe you got a meeting being proposed and discussed. Maybe it's just a BK meeting. Going to get together. Well, what are we going to do? Well, the melancholy in the group may speak up. They've thought carefully about this. They've sat through the meeting maybe for a few minutes. They've been thinking. The wheels are turning. And so the melancholy speaks up and says, I have an idea. Maybe it's going to be breakfast food. Sometimes we do that in our Brothers Keepers meetings. Hey, I have an idea. What if we had a breakfast food themed Brothers Keepers meeting? And we could have like pancakes. We could do eggs and grits and sausage. And some other people are kind of going, And you know what the choleric says? Because it's on his mind. Or she says, I don't really like breakfast food. And the melancholy is just like, I sat there and I thought of this idea. I had it organized. I presented it in a very logical and organized way. But you don't like breakfast food. And so now they're upset, right? Maybe even the sanguine person, the more sanguine in the group says, oh, that's a good idea. And maybe the suggestion is a Mexican food theme. And so maybe the sanguine says, oh, yeah, we could even decorate with some little decorations or something like that. And the choleric, it's on his mind. And he says, that's kind of dumb. It's just a Brothers Keepers meeting. And now the sanguine is like, what a jerk. Why is that dumb? And then the meeting ends. People are mad. There's no party plan. There's no. Now the Brothers Keepers meeting is just off. It's canceled. We're not even going to fool with this right now. And everybody's upset except for the choleric. He's not upset because, why is everybody so mad? I don't get it. Why are they so mad? I didn't mean to upset anybody. I just told them how I felt. That's a good example of how the choleric, without even meaning to, can hurt other folks' feelings. Was that the second bell? Man. they're also aggressive, which goes with their leadership ability. We'll talk about this. We'll have to talk about it next time because I know that the kids are not going to wait. There may be more sanguines that are going to come barging in here, and they're gonna be loud and talkative, and I'd hate to have to try to talk over them. I could, but I won't. We'll stop right there. We'll talk about how sometimes cholerics can be aggressive, and it can make them come across as difficult to others. We'll look at some other things, and then we'll look at the melancholies, the phlegmatics, what can make them difficult. And then, as I said, we'll transition into, okay, if you're dealing with a difficult melancholy, phlegmatic, sanguine, or choleric, here's what you can do that can help, probably will help tremendously to alleviate the stress, the difficulty of dealing with that person. Like I said, I'm very much looking forward to this part of our study. I hate that I'm going to be missing a few weeks here on a mission trip. I'm very thankful Brandon and others who are going to help kind of take up the slack. But I've enjoyed this study so much, I hate to just stop for 3 weeks and pick it back up. But hey, for the sanguines, it'll be shiny and new again when we come back after 3 weeks off, right? So there you go. But I've enjoyed it. And like I said, I think this is one of the most important parts of our study, getting along with difficult people. Thank you very much. We'll pick up there next time.